I'll be honest with you guys, I'm feeling pretty conflicted right now. Going into this comparison, I thought the verdict would be, pretty one sided, but after running all these benchmarks, looking at prices, and weighing the features, the answer isn't as simple as just buy this card. The reality is a lot more complicated. So I put the RTX 3080 and the RTX 5060 Ti 16GB into a head to head comparison in newest and most demanding titles that we have today to see which one really gives you the better experience for your money. There's a lot of data to go through, so let's get into it.
Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video.
Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here. Welcome back to the channel and I hope you've all been doing well. This RTX 5060 Ti managed to make its way onto my desk. I'm just helping out a friend who's building their first gaming PC, and we decided to go with this card. And while in the process for waiting for other parts, I decided to benchmark this GPU against my RTX 3080. I believe a head-to-head comparison between these two GPUs in particular is very interesting, and the information we extract from these benchmarks could also be very helpful to those who are looking for a GPU that goes under, $500 and can play modern games at 1440p with good frame rates. The other reason why I was prompted on doing this benchmark comparison is because for all the information that I've seen out there from other testers who have tested these two cards, they appear to be pretty close to each other when it comes to gaming performance. Therefore, the question becomes, should you scour your local used market to pick up a used RTX 3080 for cheap, but take the risk of getting a GPU that, may have issues and has no warranty, or should you buy a brand new card and not have to take that risk? Plus, you get the benefit of getting extra VRAM. We're going to be circling back to that and discuss those arguments in more detail later on in the video once we've taken a look at those benchmarks. But we have a lot of benchmarks and data to go through. I was looking at my local used markets and was looking at prices on eBay and have seen RTX 3080s going for around $330 to $380. I was talking to my friend Kyle from Taekwondo who lives south of the border, and he's also in the business of buying and trading used PC parts, and he told me that in his area, 3080s usually go for around $320 to $370, whereas if we look at Amazon.com for the cheapest RTX 5060 Ti 16GB, I could find them at the time of making this video around $450, which is about $20 higher than MSRP. As for the 8GB model, just pretend it does not exist. I really can't recommend anyone buying an 8GB GPU for around $400 in 2025. This specific model that I've got here is the Asus Prime triple fan model. Here's a quick look at the card itself before we dive into the numbers. The Prime RTX 5060 Ti goes for a clean utilitarian vibe, a matte black shroud with thin white grid lines and big Prime lettering along the shroud. The triple axial tech fans fill the front and keep the design symmetrical. No RGB here, which I kinda actually prefer for a stealthy build. Around the back, you'll get a full-length metal backplate with big vent cutouts over the fin stack, so air can pass through the heatsink instead of just bouncing off the PCB. A nice touch for cases with good top exhaust. Physically, it's a 2.5 slot card, about 304mm long and 120mm tall, so it will fit in most mid-towers without any sort of issues, and Asus still calls it SFF ready if your case has the clearance. Power is simple, a single 8-pin power connector, and a 550 watt PSU recommendation, which keeps the cable management easy and avoids the clunky 12V PWR adapters you see on higher end cards. I/O is pretty modern with one HDMI 2.1B and 3 DisplayPort 2.1B connectors for up to 4 displays. You also get some practical build quality bits, dual ball bearing fans for longevity, a true 0 dB idle that shuts the fans off on desktop, and a physical dual BIOS switch so you can choose between performance or quiet without the need for software. Overall, it's a no-nonsense monochrome card that looks clean in a windowed case, doesn't scream for attention, and focuses on cooling and compatibility first, which is exactly what you'd want from a mid-range, value-oriented GPU. As for my RTX 3080, this is the MSI Gaming Trio model, and I'm not going to go over the design of this card as I already did that 5 years ago, so check that video out if you're interested in hearing my thoughts about the design. However, I did want to just quickly go over some of the noteworthy specifications for both of these graphics cards. The 3080 is still a beast on paper, offering high memory bandwidth and a lot of CUDA cores for more processing throughput, but it could be hampered by its 10GB of VRAM. By contrast, the RTX 5060 Ti is a very different philosophy, Fewer cores and a narrower 128-bit bus, but 16GB of next-generation GDDR7 memory at 28 gigabits per second, plus Blackwell's newer RT and Tensor blocks. Effective bandwidth is lower on paper, 448GB per second, but you also get newer cache compression and the latest DLSS features. So the 5060 Ti tries to win with modern efficiency and smarter acceleration instead of brute force. Now, as you guys know on my channel, I like to show my hardware tweaked and tuned, so both of these GPUs are overclocked as far as I could push them in MSI Afterburner, so that's what differentiates my testing with others because most of them test with their GPUs in stock or out-of-the-box configurations. Moving on, let's discuss the test system specifications before diving into the benchmarks. For the CPU, we have an AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D, which I've overclocked using PBO2 and Curve Optimizer. It's paired with 32GB of DDR5 memory, running at 6200 megatransfers CL28. The motherboard is an MSI X870 Tomahawk. For storage, we're using a Corsair MP600 Pro LPX 4TB Gen 4 NVMe. And for the operating system, I'm using Windows 11 IoT Enterprise with no bloatware on it. I'll have the full specs of the test system in the video description down below. As for the games, I've tested 20 games at 1440p using high settings. I targeted 1440p as I believe this is a good resolution for GPUs in this segment, and while it feels like prices on everything is going up, 1440p monitors have actually become quite cheap and accessible. If I was testing GPUs in that mid $200 segment, I would feel like 1080p is more appropriate. And if you're wondering why I'm opting to use high settings as opposed to max or ultra, you can check this video out here and it will explain everything to you. However, some games were tested with a mixture of low settings as well, and those will be noted. Alright, so for the first game, and thankfully I had the 5060 Ti on hand while the Battlefield 6 open beta was ongoing, so I had the chance to test both of these cards. Now remember, this is not a direct run-to-run comparison. These are two separate matches, we're just comparing the overall performance seen from their matches. However, as you guys can see, performance between these two GPUs is very similar. We're averaging a little over 150 FPS with our 1% lows around 120 FPS, which is excellent performance for both of these cards, and either one will deliver a satisfactory experience to the user. What you guys will see throughout though is how much less power the RTX 5060 Ti uses compared to the RTX 3080. So if you're in a region where that is a big concern, then the choice becomes easier for you. The next game we have is Clair Obscur Expedition 33 at 1440p with high settings, and in this game we see that the 3080 pulls ahead by 6% for the average FPS and 4% for the 1% lows, though you'd be hard pressed to notice the difference between either GPUs. Definitely playable and enjoyable, but if you wanted to attain more performance, then perhaps lowering the game's settings or enabling DLSS would allow you to consistently remain above 60 FPS. Next up is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and both of these GPUs offer fantastic performance at 1440p with high settings, averaging above 100 FPS. It has to be noted though that the RTX 3080 is faster by a considerable margin, 13% faster for the average FPS, and when it comes to the 1% lows, we saw a 15% difference. VRAM sits around the 8 to 9.5 GB mark on both cards, so the 5060 Ti's 16 GB headroom doesn't really matter here, and nothing's really texture limited anyways. What you feel is the 3080's wider 320-bit bus, and the extra shaders translating to tighter frame times. In Marvel Rivals, both GPUs deliver excellent performance at 1440p. The RTX 3080 does pull ahead slightly by around 7% for the average FPS, and 3% for the 1% lows. Not something that the player would even notice, but around 100 FPS average is totally smooth, but if you're going for that high refresh experience, lowering settings or using upscaling is recommended. Moving on, let's talk about Oblivion Remastered. This one plays almost identically on both GPUs. The RTX 3080 manages a paper-thin lead of about 1%, but 1% lows are a dead tie. With these settings, neither card is anywhere close to the VRAM limits, and the game itself isn't demanding enough to stretch the architectures apart. In practice, the experience is virtually indistinguishable, smooth, stable, and highly playable on either GPU. This matchup is effectively a draw. Alright, so the next game we have is Monster Hunter Wilds, a game that gamers are praying receives some kind of miracle patch due to how buggy and poor optimized it is. At 1440p high settings, both graphics cards are essentially neck and neck, and they are able to deliver what I'd say is a playable experience, though if you want to ensure you attain a frame rate above 60 FPS, you'll have to either go down to 1080p or use upscaling like DLSS on balanced, and the RTX 5060 Ti does have the advantage here by being able to use DLSS frame generation. Interestingly, the 5060 Ti does show a VRAM usage above 10 gigabytes. The actual process is around 9, which isn't problematic for the 3080, but it's not like the visuals justify it anyways. Here's an interesting one. Black Ops 6 actually swings in favor of the RTX 5060 Ti. At 1440p low, it's about 8% faster on averages and roughly 5% better on 1% lows. This could be down to the newer Blackwell architecture being better tuned for this engine. Regardless, both GPUs pump out well over high refresh territory, so the gameplay is buttery smooth either way. The difference here just means that the 5060 Ti is giving you a slight edge in consistency. Next, we'll be taking a look at Indiana Jones and the Great Circle at 1440p high with native settings. In this game, the RTX 3080 stretches out a bigger lead, landing about 16% faster on averages and 14% faster in the 1% lows. The extra headroom means that the RTX 3080 handles dense foliage and heavy scenes with noticeably better stability. The RTX 5060 Ti still delivers a smooth and very playable experience, but here the 3080 clearly provides a better ride if you're looking for higher consistency in these demanding jungle environments. High settings is just perfect as it looks great and still is manageable for the 3080's 10GB VRAM buffer. It's kind of weird saying this, but Cyberpunk 2077 is the oldest game on our list, but I still like including it considering how popular it is. It's still getting updates, looks great, and can push hardware pretty heavily. And also, this was a game that came out shortly after the 3080 launch, so it was like the main marketing seller for NVIDIA when it came to Ampere. Now, when it comes to performance, both GPUs deliver excellent performance at 1440p with high settings. The 3080 pulls ahead by 9% for the average FPS, and also 7% on the 1% lows, so another win for the Ampere's 80 class. Spider-Man 2 is up next, and after multiple patches, this game still has issues. While the average frame rate is great for both GPUs, above 100 FPS, the experience still feels a bit jarring because of how low the 1% lows are relative to the average FPS. There's just too much variance going on, and it sucks because Spider-Man Remastered ran very well with super smooth frame times. In terms of performance, both GPUs would be offering roughly an identical experience, so it's a wash here. Hogwarts Legacy really shows the strength of the RTX 3080, which comes in about 25% faster on averages and is around 15% stronger in the 1% lows compared to the 5060 Ti. The extra bandwidth and shader count really help smooth out the busy city areas where performance is known to dip. The 5060 Ti still delivers a pretty solid and very playable experience, but the 3080 provides a noticeably smoother experience overall, especially if you're chasing after high refresh gameplay. In Horizon Forbidden West, the RTX 3080 holds a steady lead, coming in about 9% faster on averages and is around 7% ahead in the 1% lows. That advantage helps smooth out performance dips when exploring detailed environments, giving the 3080 a slightly more consistent feel overall. Still, the 5060 Ti keeps frame rates comfortably above 60, meaning both cards deliver a very playable experience at 1440p. For Alan Wake 2, I decided to test at medium settings instead of max or high, since in this game medium is already quite demanding and it still looks fantastic. The RTX 3080 pulls ahead here with about a 13% advantage in average FPS. Interestingly, the 1% lows between both GPUs are nearly identical, meaning gameplay fluidity feels much the same on either card. In practice, both deliver a very smooth experience at 1440p, though the 3080 clearly has the ability to push a little bit of extra frames. For Black Myth Wukong, both GPUs face a serious workout at 1440p high settings, but the results are pretty telling. The RTX 3080 manages to hold a small lead of about 11% in the averages and 1% lows. That's definitely enough to make a difference when you're pushing a demanding Unreal Engine 5 title like this one. Still, the RTX 5060 Ti is surprisingly competent here. It keeps the game playable above 60 FPS, even if it's riding much closer to the limit. The RTX 3080, on the other hand, has a bit of extra smoothness and consistency that helps avoid drops in busier scenes. In short, the RTX 5060 Ti is good enough for a solid experience, but the 3080 delivers a safer cushion for one of the heaviest games around. For The Last of Us Part 2 at 1440p high, both GPUs deliver excellent performance, but the RTX 3080 does show an advantage of about 9% in averages and around 4% in the 1% lows compared to the RTX 5060 Ti. The difference isn't massive, and for the most part, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between either GPU. Still, both cards provide a very fluid and enjoyable gameplay experience here, so you'd be well off regardless of which GPU you're running. Stalker 2 is up next, and both GPUs are delivering a very solid experience at 1440p high settings. The RTX 3080 pulls ahead by around 4% in averages and about 3% in the 1% lows. So it's not a massive gap or anything, and again, it's another game where you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two cards. Overall though, both cards keep the game running at very playable levels without any major dips. In Space Marine 2 at 1440p high, performance between the 5060 Ti and the RTX 3080 is nearly identical. Both GPUs deliver smooth gameplay in the high 80s on average, with very steady frame times, and the difference between them is effectively within margin of error. Okay, Baldurs Gate 3 shows us some very surprising results, and I honestly thought that we would be seeing a tie in this game since it's so CPU bound, but as it turns out, these two cards show us some very different behavior. And I did multiple runs because I wanted to be absolutely sure I didn't mess something up with the settings. So the RTX 3080 here is a whopping 20% faster when it comes to the average FPS, but it is 18% slower in the 1% lows. So while the 3080 at first may appear faster, which it is technically, the 5060 Ti may appear smoother due to the better consistency. For Lies of P at 1440p high, the RTX 3080 shows about a 10% lead in average FPS compared to the RTX 5060 Ti, but what stands out is how both GPUs deliver very high frame rates overall, with the 5060 Ti already into the triple digits. Interestingly, the RTX 3080 doesn't push higher averages, and it also improves the 1% lows by around 13%. Which makes gameplay noticeably smoother in those heavier moments when the action really ramps up. The takeaway here is that both GPUs deliver an excellent experience. The 5060 Ti feels rock solid, especially if you're on a high refresh rate monitor, while the 3080 simply takes it up a little notch by ensuring tighter frame pacing and a smoother baseline. Finally, in Remnant 2, the RTX 3080 takes a clear win with about a 19% uplift in average frame rates compared to the 5060 Ti. What's more interesting is that both GPUs share nearly identical 1% lows, sitting in the high 50s. That means while the 3080 offers higher peaks and smoother averages, the actual dips in performance feels very similar between the two cards. In practice, gameplay is fluid on both. The 3080 gives you a bit more headroom for demanding encounters or high refresh rate play. When you look at the 20 game average, it almost makes the RTX 5060 Ti seem like it's keeping pace with the RTX 3080. But it is a bit misleading because the averages hide the real story. Once you break things down game by game, it's clear that the 3080 still holds the upper hand in the vast majority of titles, and about half of them it's winning by margins of nearly 10% or more. Games like Hogwarts Legacy, Baldurs Gate 3, and Remnant 2 really highlight this with double-digit gains, showing just how much raw shader count and memory bandwidth still matter. The RTX 5060 Ti does sneak ahead in a couple of cases, but those wins are either within margin of error or very specific engine scenarios. Nothing that changes the bigger picture though. At the end of the day, the 3080's wider bus, higher throughput, and brute force architecture prove that even 5 years later, Ampere's 80 class card can still flex its muscles and stay ahead of NVIDIA's newest 60 class offering. And I find that to be a little bit disappointing, but we're going to come back to this later on. I did want to show you guys some ray tracing benchmarks. I didn't benchmark a lot of games because I think consumers in this segment probably don't really care too much about ray tracing, but still I was curious to see how these two lower mid-range GPUs would perform. So the first title is Cyberpunk 2077, and do keep in mind to compensate for that large FPS hit, I did combine these tests with DLSS in quality mode, as I figured most users, when using ray tracing, would probably be utilizing upscaling as well. In Cyberpunk 2077 with ray tracing enabled, we see the 5060 Ti pull ahead by 8% for the average FPS and 6% in the 1% lows. Considering how much slower the 5060 Ti was in regular raster performance, that's actually quite the turnaround. Next we have Hogwarts Legacy, and I don't know what it is, but with ray tracing enabled, the lows in this game are actually quite atrocious. But even so, the 5060 Ti holds a massive 30% advantage when it comes to the average FPS, which is very interesting considering in raw raster, the 3080 was nearly 25% faster in this game. Next, we have Alan Wake 2, and this is another game where the 5060 Ti holds an advantage over the RTX 3080. It's not huge when it comes to the average FPS though, but the 1% lows are considerably higher by 17%. It really looks like Blackwell is much more superior when it comes to the ray tracing performance between these two graphics cards. The last game we'll take a look at is Oblivion Remastered, and here both GPUs are offering great performance. In fact, we're seeing slightly higher performance compared to our raw raster data, which tells you that the performance penalty for hardware LumenRT in this game isn't substantial, and then when combined with upscaling, it pushes the FPS further. And while both GPUs were tied in regular raster performance, the 5060 Ti is leading here by around 13% and average FPS, with Hardware Lumen RT. Now we see the story flip a bit because in all the ray tracing tests, the RTX 5060 Ti is faster, and in some cases the margins are huge. This performance advantage is attributed to the more updated and faster RT cores of the Blackwell architecture. The RTX 3080 being Ampere's 80 class was built for more brute force raster performance, while the RTX 5060 Ti benefits from 5 years of refinement in ray tracing and DLSS integration. This makes the matchup a lot more nuanced. Raster performance still belongs to the 3080, but if you're looking at heavy ray traced workloads, the 5060 Ti quietly pulls ahead. But I do also wonder just how many gamers in this segment buying a 5060 Ti or looking at a used card for around $350 would be turning on ray tracing and playing with it to begin with. Circling back to the raw raster performance, and the reason why I said I was a little bit disappointed, don't get me wrong, the 5060 Ti 16GB is still able to deliver a good solid experience at 1440p if you kind of look at it in a vacuum. And if you're playing at 1080p, the experience will be even better. It's just that looking at things from a technological advancement perspective, the progress seems pretty lackluster to me because a 60 Ti class card is only trading blows with a 2-generation-old 80 class GPU from 5 years ago. Whereas I remember when I had reviewed the RTX 3060 Ti, it was most often beating my RTX 2080 Super. And, my expectation was that now we should have a 60 class card that should be able to do that quite reliably. But it is what it is, crying all day about the lack of progression isn't really going to be accomplishing anything. And you just have to evaluate what's suitable for your needs and make your decision that way. So the RTX 5060 Ti, advantages you get there are that it's newer, so support for features like frame generation X4, it consumes like half the power when compared to the overclocked RTX 3080, even when that card was overclocked. So if you live in an area where electricity rates are quite high, then, this will be a no-brainer for you. And also, that heat, you're definitely going to feel it, 400 watts versus 200 watts. You get 16 gigabytes of VRAM, allowing it to probably age better. The other advantages of buying a new card is that you'll get a new product, and that's not used. So, you shouldn't have any concerns for any defects or issues like that. I mean, if there are defects, you just return it to the store. And you do also get 2 to 3 or 4 years of warranty, depending on which manufacturer you're going to go with. Now, if you go with the RTX 3080, one of the main advantages, obviously, is that it's going to be cheaper. Like I said, you can find these cards for around $320 to $370, whereas the new 5060 Ti 16GB are going for around $450, if not even more than that. And the 3080 still offers, overall better raster performance. So if you don't really care about ray tracing at all or frame generation or any of that stuff, then yeah, the 3080 is still a very, very solid performer. So at the end of the day, the decision really comes down to, what kind of gamer are you and what you value the most. If you want raw raster performance and you don't mind the extra power draw or rolling the dice on the used market, the RTX 3080 is still an absolute monster even 5 years later. But if you have, if you'd rather go for something new with modern features, much better efficiency, more VRAM, and, surprisingly strong ray tracing performance, then the RTX 5060 Ti 16GB does make a lot of sense. Both cards can handle, 1440p gaming with ease, but, they kind of get there in different ways. Personally, I just can't help but feel NVIDIA, should have given us more progression with the 60 class over these last few years. I feel like, the 5060 Ti, if this is what the 4060 Ti was to begin with, then I think a lot of people would have actually been praising that card when it came out. So you just kind of need to weigh the trade-offs and choose what makes sense for your build and your budget. But that's going to be doing it for this one. Hopefully this video helps you guys out with your buying decisions, and we'll touch base in the next video. Take care.
If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.